Hi, everyone, and welcome to the State of State Schools podcast. I'm your host, John Stamper, Christian author, former homeschooler, and former public school teacher. Once a week, I'll give a quick recap of the most important headlines in education and pull back the curtain on what's really happening in our kids' schools. If you're a teacher, parent, or homeschool family, this podcast is for you. Thanks for listening, and let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 61. This is a special bonus episode addressing a very important question. Where did school choice come from? You know, whenever I'm having a discussion with friends or family about school choice, I say that, in fact, I do not support the school choice movement. And they automatically assume, usually, that I'm a liberal or a left-winger, but I'm neither of those things. I'm a Christian, first of all. I'm a conservative, and yet I do not support the school choice movement. So how can that be? Well, most people think school choice is synonymous with educational freedom, but it's not. I do support true educational freedom, but the school choice movement doesn't help with that. It actually hurts it. To be completely honest, up until 2021, I did support the school choice movement and vouchers. I saw it as this grassroots, Tea Party, education first sort of movement, a way that families could protect their kids from being indoctrinated in government schools. But, spoiler alert, it's actually the opposite. School choice is just another welfare-style government program that uses tax dollars, aka free money, as the cheese in the mousetrap. School choice actually increases government control over private education, and yes, that includes homeschooling. So this whole grassroots Tea Party freedom concept is really just propaganda. I'm not saying those who support the school choice movement are lying or that they're dishonest or anything like that. I believe most people are just like I was, wanting an alternative to government schools, and the school choice movement on the surface sounds like the solution. But after we pull back the curtain a little bit and talk about where school choice came from, I think that you'll see it's actually just another big government socialist program. So in this episode, I'm going to do my best to demonstrate why, as a Christian, as a conservative, a former homeschooler, and a former private and public school teacher, why I do not support the school choice movement. So here are 4 reasons why I don't support the school choice movement. Number 1, whoever pays for something, i.e. the customer, owns and controls that thing. This can be referred to as power of the purse or shekels with shackles. So if the government is paying for education, they control education. Number 2, the government doesn't have its own money. It only uses or misuses the money that it legally plunders or taxes from its citizens. And once your money is taken and taxed, it's no longer your money. This is one of the biggest misconceptions out there, that government handouts are quote unquote your money. But that just shows the effectiveness of the school choice propaganda. Number 3, quote, costs increase when the government floods the private sector with money, end quote. That's a direct quote from Robert Bortons, the CEO of Classical Conversations. If and when a state implements a school choice voucher system, then curriculum costs and government regulations will both increase, and the quality of whatever the government subsidizes will go down. We know this because it's already happened in other states like Arizona and in other industries. So when the government subsidizes something, costs go up and quality goes down. What's rarely mentioned is that increased costs and regulations apply to families that reject school choice funds too. I'll say that again. What's rarely mentioned is that the increased costs and increased regulations also apply to families that reject school choice funds. Because school choice legislation rarely, if ever, distinguishes between funded and non-funded families. So everyone is lumped in together by default. So if tuition and curriculum costs go up, they go up for everyone, not just those who receive the vouchers. And once you receive that voucher, it's hard to give that up. This is the cheese in the mousetrap. This is why we can't just stay quiet and mind our own business when it comes to the school choice issue. because the decisions made by our freedom-loving, conservative, and Christian neighbors to adopt school choice will have terrible consequences for everyone in home education. And number 4, public funds that are allocated by a government agency are required by law to be regulated and accounted for. This means there must be government oversight, also known as strings attached. You can go to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services website and read it for yourself. It says, quote, "The federal government has the right to audit any program that receives public money at any time," end quote. So this alone is reason enough to say that school choice funds or vouchers are not compatible with true educational freedom, because parents and families who accept such funds will always be accountable to Uncle Sam and the government agencies that allocated the school choice funds. Hopefully, this information will cause you to look into school choice a bit more and ultimately not only reject school choice funds in your state, but work to reject any school choice legislation in your state as well. So let's start with the obvious question. Where did school choice come from? This whole discussion is based on a 1955 essay called "The Role of Government in Education." Now, this essay was written by Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman, who favored a small, limited federal government and a free market capitalist system. Friedman even stated in the introduction of this essay that the goal was to reverse the trend of collectivism. Now, oddly enough, Friedman is also considered to be the father of the modern school choice movement, a title given to him out of context, I think, and stems from his 1955 essay. Friedman made it clear in the essay that his role as an economist was not to make decisions on education for the community, but his role was to simply clarify the issues so people could make informed decisions. So he discussed things like elementary education versus higher education. He discussed government funding versus private funding, and basically pointed out pros and cons for each scenario. And a voucher system, aka school choice, was one of those scenarios. At the beginning of his essay, Friedman observed that, quote, "Education is today," and again, this was 1955, 70 years ago, "Education is today largely paid for and almost entirely administered by governmental bodies or nonprofit institutions. This situation has developed gradually and is now taken so much for granted that little explicit attention is any longer directed to the reasons for the special treatment of education, even in countries that are predominantly free enterprise in organization and philosophy. The result has been an indiscriminate extension of governmental responsibility." So, Friedman begins with a few key points. First of all, government is funding and controlling education. Second, it's a situation that has developed gradually over time. Third, nobody seems to be paying attention to the fact that government is controlling education. And 4, as a result, government has grown. And that's really what I'm talking about here. That's why the school choice movement isn't this parental freedom movement that it's made out to be. It's simply another government program paid for, administered by, and regulated by governmental bodies. It's socialism. Friedman went on to say, quote, "Because the financing of general education by government is widely accepted, the provision of general education directly by governmental bodies has also been accepted. So because they pay for it, it's assumed that they're going to administer it." Now, Friedman rightly pointed out the only way governmental bodies could control education and impose its regulations upon families is by paying for it. That's a key point. So since government pays for education, they also administer and control education. School choice vouchers do not change this. He stated that if a government were to implement a voucher system in which parents would receive funds to educate their children, then parents could only use those funds on, quote, "approved services," end quote. So if a parent gets a voucher, they could send their child to a private school, but only if that private school was, quote unquote, approved by the government, or Another example, parents could use the voucher to educate their child at home, but only if that voucher is used to buy an approved curriculum. You see the problem there? Government has to approve everything. This was 70 years ago, 1955. The situation is much worse today. So when it came to government's role in education, Friedman came to these three conclusions. The government's growth to that point had been unbalanced. Number two, the government's funding of education was inappropriate. And number three, the government's control of schools was unjustifiable. And again, this was 70 years ago. Has the government grown in the last 70 years? Friedman explained that one reason the government's control over education had become so unbalanced, so inappropriate, and so unjustifiable was that we failed to separate what the government should finance and what the government should administer. So there are certain things the government should finance, but there are also certain things the government should not administer, like education. This is where Friedman first mentioned the idea of quote unquote school choice. He was discussing the relationship between government funding and government control. He said, and again, this was just one of the options he gave as a way to fund education. He wasn't necessarily advocating for it. He said, quote, government, preferably local governmental units, would give each child, through his parents, a specified sum to be used solely in paying for his general education. The parents would be free to spend this sum at a school of their own choice, provided it met certain minimum standards laid down by the appropriate governmental unit, end quote. So here Friedman mentions governmental bodies giving money to children through their parents to attend a quote unquote school of their own choice. And with that, the school choice movement was born. So that sounds pretty much like today's school choice movement, right? Government gives money to parents, parents use it to educate their children. But while Friedman did say that governmental bodies could play a role in education, the difference is that Friedman's concept of government was predicated on a society that valued individual liberty and the sanctity of the family unit. And that's a huge distinction. He was careful to point out that, quote, I shall assume a society that takes freedom of the individual, or more realistically, the family, as its ultimate objective, and seeks to further this objective by relying primarily on voluntary exchange among individuals for the organization of economic activity, end quote. So in Friedman's school choice voucher system, he said it only worked if society's ultimate goal was for the individuals and families to be free. Number two, if there was a voluntary exchange between the individuals and the government or school. So let me ask, is individual liberty and the sanctity of the family unit our ultimate goal today in society? Unfortunately, many schools across the country are undermining parents by implementing things like parental secrecy policies, allowing school staff to lie to parents and keep information from them. And while there certainly are many individuals who still hold the family unit as sacred and who value individual liberty, our society is more dependent on government today than it has ever been. Can we achieve individual liberty by participating in a government welfare program? Which is really what the school choice program is. Also, is it a voluntary exchange when the government legally plunders its citizens, takes their money, and gives a portion back to them, but with strings attached? Is that voluntary? No, it's not. But that's what school choice is, and we've accepted it as normal and natural. Friedman acknowledged that parents should be responsible for educating their children, not the government. He said the role of government is based on the values of the society. I'll say that again. The role of government is based on the values of society. And the government's role was simply to enforce laws to keep the free market free. But he also recognized that some parents abuse or mistreat their children, or some parents simply cannot financially afford to educate their children. In such cases, he said, quote, private initiative and enterprise would quicken the pace of progress in this area as it has in so many others. Private initiative, not public, not government programs, but private enterprise. is more efficient than government administration. Now, one example of a private enterprise would be Christian Education Scholarship Programs, or CESPs, through the local church. Now, I've discussed these in previous episodes. School choice is not private because it uses public funds, which are allocated by governmental bodies. And when the government passes out public funds, they must regulate those funds. So do we want government regulation in our private schools? Or worse yet, in our homes? So to me, this is what it all boils down to. A government is only as moral as the people who are running it. If we had the same shared values, then maybe a government program could work. But we don't have shared values in society anymore. Friedman asked why our education system has developed into this government-run machine, and his only conclusion was that it's a modern phenomenon that's a direct result of increased taxes and government programs. And he's right. Government schools are a modern phenomenon. Up until the 1850s, home education was the norm. And that's also the biblical model, by the way. Parents are in charge. Parents are charged by God to train their children up in the way they should go. So, to summarize, it seems clear that Friedman was not advocating for today's version of school choice because Friedman was not a proponent of big government. And today's school choice movement requires and reinforces big government. School choice results in more taxes, higher taxes, more government programs. It makes curriculum and tuition more expensive, and it makes us less free. Things to consider. I hope you guys dig a little bit into the school choice movement, pull back the curtain, and see what you find out. All right, take care, everybody. Thanks.